Hello, everyone. Welcome to Into the Deep, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce Father Thomas Moore. He's in New York at St. Vincent Ferrer, and he helps at the Provincial Foundation, and he's in my class. We went through formation together, so he's a good friend of mine, and he's going to talk today about business ethics. It's an interest of his throughout our time in seminary. You enjoyed that, studying that topic. And his background is in law and in business, so he has practical and theoretical experience to share with us. So,
thank you. Father Boniface and I met in formation, and most of our formation takes place at a building called the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C., which is where all the friars receive the bulk of their training for the priesthood. And I remember once a few years back, when I was still at the Dominican House of Studies, and I was contemplating some decision. It wasn't one of any significant import. I can't even remember what it was at this time, but I asked the senior friar if he had any advice for me. And the friar stopped and looked at me and said, "Do good and avoid evil. Do good and avoid evil." All right, well, now this advice, while solid to be sure, provides little in practical direction, all right, lacking in specificity, all right, often needed for practical direction. Now, some critics have suggested that the same might be said of the Church's teaching concerning business ethics. In other words, there is a perception that the Church, while offering much that is aspirational in tone, is far too general to offer a lot of direction when she speaks on commercial matters. Some find little concrete guidance, aside from that which would apply generally. Do not lie. Do not cheat your customers or clients. And without greater specificity, moral direction can, practically speaking, offer little help to today's business owner or manager. And maybe after all, the Church shouldn't speak to business ethics, after all. Which sort of expertise would she possess? Well, none insofar as business itself is concerned. Benedict XVI only echoes earlier Church teaching when he writes in Caritas in Veritate, his last encyclical, that the Church does not offer technical solutions to commercial problems, or establish specific models to govern business affairs. Well, why not then? Why not then just stay silent? We're going to answer that question, and hopefully several others, but what I want to focus on tonight, though, are some very practical guidelines offered by the popes of recent years that supply something of a moral compass for all business owners and managers, regardless of the size of their commercial enterprise. Now, this is not a matter of lists of do's and don'ts. Think of what we plan to lay out tonight as a kind of framework for how to approach business affairs that is sufficiently concrete, contains enough meat to be instructive and useful for action in the here and now. All right, now the main vehicle for communicating these guidelines that I want to draw from is a set of documents called the modern social encyclicals. Now, what are the modern social encyclicals? All right, well, the modern social encyclicals, the earliest of which was issued in 1891 by Pope Leo XIII, all right, that one is called Rerum Novarum. All right, the modern social encyclicals generally begin with Rerum Novarum and extend most recently to Francis's Laudato Si. Now, these documents address a wide range of topics. Much of the material pertains to broad global political and macroeconomic concerns. And that's not what I want to talk about, because included within the wider scope of these documents are teachings and advice for business professionals engaged in the daily activities of commercial affairs. Now, my talk this evening is going to speak most directly to a business professional engaged in managing or operating a business of today. These individuals would include entrepreneurs, corporate executives of entities of various sizes, managers of specific business units and functions, consultants of various competencies who advise them, as well as small business owners. What I can't do is offer a comprehensive review of all papal teachings relevant to business practitioners. That would be far too much to bite off for this evening. Instead, what I'll attempt to do is synthesize a handful of themes drawn largely from the modern social encyclicals in an effort to identify what the documents have highlighted as the one foundational issue for business professionals trying to live the Christian faith within the context of a commercial environment. And that central concern, I'll give you a little preview, that central concern pertains to the role that the pursuit of profit has in the lives of today's business professionals. Profit and the relation toward profit is what lies at the core of Catholic business ethics. Now, as you know, I am a Dominican friar, all right, and I would be remiss if I didn't make some mention of the considerable contributions that the friars, specifically St. Thomas Aquinas, have made to the development of papal thought in this area. Now, that's ironic. One of the ironies of history is that mendicant friars who take a vow of poverty, contributed so much of the material that guides the Church's ethics in commercial affairs. In fact, looking back in history, it was the friars who developed an ethic justifying the commercial activities of medieval merchants and urban professionals, which at first was viewed with, at best, cynicism. No less a source than the LA Times calls a work by Dominican Johannes Schneider, all right, a tract of his that translates into English something like On the Contract of Merchants. The LA Times calls that tract the first study devoted to business ethics printed in the Western world. What was the year? 1468, all right, printed by Dominican Johannes Schneider. All right, so that's what I want to do tonight. But first, let's return to that question I raised earlier. Why the church? What would the church have to say of any real relevance to business ethics? Is it beyond her expertise, too complicated? And should the church even really be involved in this area? Albert Carr, in a famous Harvard Business Review article that goes back a number of years, titled, "Is Business Bluffing Ethical?" That's Carr's article. Is business bluffing ethical? Carr provided a firm and unapologetic no to this question. Carr argued that the ethics of business are game ethics, quite different from the ethics of religion. Once folks enter into their business lives, according to Carr, they cease to be private citizens. They become game players who must be guided by a somewhat different set of ethics than those that might apply in other areas of life. Now, Carr urged his readers to think of business as something of a poker game. And no one, Carr pointed out, expects poker to be played on the ethical principles preached in churches. Now, implicit in Carr's idea is the notion of a divided life. The idea that an individual can be one person in the workplace and another outside of it. The divided life was actually an area of some concern to the Second Vatican Council. Gaudium et Spes, all right, Gaudium et Spes, which is the Second Vatican Council document on the church in the modern world. All right, Gaudium et Spes says in paragraph 43 that this split between the faith which many profess and their daily lives deserves to be counted among the more serious errors of the age. This split between the faith which many profess and their daily lives deserves to be counted among the more serious errors of the age. More recently, a document issued by the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace in 2012 called The Vocation of a Business Leader, a Reflection. That document listed leading a divided life among the most significant obstacles that today's business professionals face in living their vocation. Now, the problem with the divided life is that it is one person trying to split one life into two, attempting to make an existential division that God Himself did not do. And we would be naive to think that habits gained in one area won't at least have some danger of affecting the other. But moreover, nowhere does God sanction the creation of a kind of submoral or immoral zone of behavior. Quite the opposite, actually. David asks in the Psalms, Psalm 139, "Where can I go from your spirit? From your presence, where can I flee?" Or in the New Testament, we find in Hebrews 4:13, "Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of Him to whom we must give account." A Christian cannot be one person in private life and another in the world of daily work. The issue for the church then, and her involvement, I think, is this. So much of the time of our adult life is devoted to work. If you think about life, you can sort of break it down into basically three areas: going to school to get a job, getting a job to earn money, earning money so hopefully, maybe if you're lucky, you can retire. Now, we want life to be about far more than those three things. All right, but over the course of most of our lives, we're going to devote a lot of our efforts to just those three. All right, and one of those three is our work. And for many people, that work is business. The church's faithful work in the business sphere. How could the church simply stay out of the field of business ethics and still be the church? She must have something to say, because a church that ignored the activities of work and professional affairs would be unfaithful to her mission to enliven and inspire all human activities with the guiding light of Christ. Now, in commemorating the 90th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, all right, that first modern social encyclical, John Paul II reminded readers in his own encyclical, Laborem Exercens, right, that human work has an ethical value of its own, which clearly and directly remains linked to the fact that the one who carries it out is a person, a conscious and free subject, that is to say, a subject that decides about himself. Now, Benedict XVI reiterated the concern of his predecessor in a 2009 encyclical, Caritas in Veritate, I referred to earlier, where he states that the conviction that the economy must be autonomous, that it must be shielded from influences of a moral character, has led man to abuse the economic process in a thoroughly destructive way. The better way to understand the economic or commercial sphere, Benedict explained, is to view it part and parcel of human activity precisely because it is human. It must be structured and governed in an ethical manner. And to be structured in an ethical manner, the commercial sphere must recognize that it is a meeting place of human beings who remain persons, even when engaged in business affairs. Now, games have their place, all right, but a limited one. Their place should be just that, playing games. Allowing life, any part of life itself, to be a game, either in business or in personal relationships, makes all parties, in the long run, losers. Paul VI, in his social encyclical, Populorum Progressio, captured the danger well when he wrote that when men and women gather together solely for the reasons of self-interest, dissension and disunity follow soon after. When men and women gather together solely for the reasons of self-interest, dissension and disunity follow soon after. That's as true in business as it is in more intimate personal relationships. Now, this is not merely a theological point that I'm making. It is a humanist one as well. The workplace and the marketplace are populated by real people carrying on real lives, and any individual engaged in any occupation is first of all a human being. The business professional is a person, and as a person, he or she or you are first of all the recipient of a gift of life itself, and then of various aptitudes and opportunities. Persons come to the marketplace or workplace, and persons arrive there bearing, if you will, gifts. Now, this is not some fluffy claim that I'm trying to make. It is basically an existential one. And recognizing that before we launch our careers or whatever we do in life, we are first given that which will allow us to pursue our chosen course, right? And understanding that we are first given something is necessary to the place of the business professional in the wider human society. All right, so what do I mean by all this? Well, what I mean is something like this. The results of all our human effort have their source in a gift from God. Okay, fine. All right, now, while that gift is first of all one of existence from the Creator to the created, the notion of gift extends to include both the particular talents, aptitudes, and skills that an individual possesses, as well as the opportunities that the individual has to apply his or her abilities and expertise. All right, so both the material goods of the earth, all right, and the human person's capacity to expand the value of those goods by reshaping and enhancing their use through the exercise of skill, stem at least initially from the Creator. So any true success achieved through the application of human talent is always based on God's prior and original gift. Now, I'm not interested in making some pious claim for gratitude toward God here. What I intend to make is an anthropological point about the condition of the human person and why that matters. All right, why it matters is this. It is not coincidence that whoever you are able to do the things that you do. All right, you are not the first agent. You're not the first agent of your own success. And human progress itself is the accumulation of the efforts of an entire human race across a multitude of generations. Each generation builds on the work of those before it in any field, right? And your place or anyone else's place in that wasn't your choosing, right? And the individual aptitude of each person participating in this movement, our ability to advance and make progress as a race, right? That ability to do so isn't something we invented. It's something we found within ourselves, something a believer would say is first given to us. Right? But in either event, whether for a believer or a non-believer, our human potential is something already inscribed in humanity's creation. It is left for us to discover and develop those particular manifestations of that potential that we find within ourselves. And the collective nature of human progress is no less true in the commercial realm, right? Even the greatest innovators owe their success to varying degrees, to conditions that others made possible, all of which can be placed back to a creator. That's as true for Steve Jobs, as Bill Gates, as John D. Rockefeller, right? No human person is a self-starter in the true sense of the term. Now, whether referring to material benefits, things like access to capital, all right, or even things like the connections that you have made in the circumstances arranged for you in your life, all right, or intellectual skills and talents, whether material benefits or intellectual skills and talents, each human person is a steward of the individual gifts in the form of these aptitudes, skills, and circumstances that he or she possesses. And the reason why they're a steward is because they have their source in what was first given, before it was cultivated and developed by human effort. And the practice of stewardship has been an important element in the modern social encyclicals. Leo XIII, explains in Rerum Novarum, that first one, that whoever has received from the divine bounty a large share of temporal blessings, whether they be external or material, or gifts of the mind, has received them for the purpose of using them for perfecting of his own nature, and at the same time that he may employ them as the steward of God's providence for the benefit of others. All right, so the gifts that God confers upon each individual are simultaneously, one, for the sake of the individual's own personal development. All right, that's significant. It's part of the way that we, working with God's grace, propel ourselves into citizenship in heaven, using those talents that we find ourselves and propelling them or cultivating them is one of the ways we work ourselves into being fit to be a citizen of heaven. Right? And secondly, they are for the good of the community of which the person is a part. And that means then that cultivating the opportunity presented by the gifts through their proper stewardship enhances the value of those gifts both to the individual and to others. And after all, they must be for both, for ourselves and for another, because they are rooted in God's grace, God's gift. For us, the practice of the virtues enables us to develop our particular personality as a child of God. They help us grow into the person that God has in mind for us. All right? They help us grow by cultivating those gifts that we have, help us grow into the person that God has in mind for us to be, the kind of personality, the sharing of his personality we have that will allow us to fit into heaven. All right? And sharing in the social character acts to guard us from selfish concern, right? By encouraging us to be other regarding, right? Which, by the way, helps us develop something of a godlike personality by being the giver of our gifts. All right? Understand what I'm saying there. Sharing our natural gifts and the fruit of those gifts is one of the ways that we become more like God. And becoming more like God is how we become fit for heaven. When Jesus died, what he did in rising from the dead is created a door through that wall that death was to human life. All right? Jesus rising from the dead made a door through that wall. To fit through that door, our soul has to take on something of the shape of his personality. All right? That's the idea. Now, the notion of stewardship has particular application to those who possess business acumen and the prospect of applying those skills in today's business world. In more recent years, John Paul II has stressed the growing importance of intellectual gifts to the expansion of economic growth. All right? He's only stating the obvious, all right, where he notes in Centesimus Annus that intellectual talent and financial skill has in many ways surpassed the ownership of real property or even financial wealth, the things that Leo probably had in mind when he talks about temporal blessings. All right, when these talents, all right, intellectual talent and financial skill, are applied to the management of other individuals and a portion of the world's material wealth, the need to cultivate and use these capacities for the good of society becomes even more important. All right, consider your work within the context of Matthew 25 and the parable of the talents. All right, your business skills are something like the talents. Now, throughout the social encyclicals, the reader can find references to a variety of virtues that pertain particularly to the human person's engagement in commercial affairs. Now, I can't attempt to enumerate all of them here, but many are what you would expect. Right? John Paul II and Centesimus Annus includes among them specifically things like diligence, industriousness, prudence in undertaking reasonable risks, fidelity to interpersonal relationships, as well as the courage in carrying out decisions which are difficult and painful, but necessary, both for the overall working of a business and in meeting possible setbacks. The opportunity to develop these virtues and their exercise enable the businessman or woman to develop him or herself into a better person. All right, but it was Pius XI. It was Pius XI way back in 1931, all right, writing what is generally considered the second modern social encyclical. Pius XI highlighted one virtue of particular significance to the commercial environment and links the cultivation of that individual virtue to the social value and character of business pursuits. In Quadrasimo Anno, Pius wrote that expending larger incomes so that opportunity for gainful work may be abundant, provided, however, that this work is applied to producing really useful goods, ought to be considered, as we deduce from the principles of the angelic doctor, an outstanding exemplification of the virtue of munificence, and one particularly suited to the needs of the times. All right, so what he's talking about here is commercial investment, particularly investment that expands opportunities for others to use their skills in the business world, and in doing so supplies a product or service that is truly useful to the public. All right, now this covers a wide range of commercial activity. There's no value to be hung up too much on the expending larger incomes piece. It's clear from the context that what Pius XI has in mind is the managing and sharing of material wealth. And this would extend to things like guiding investment and wealth management, to the development and management of real estate, just to name a few. Now this Pius XI cites as a great example of virtue. And in support of his teaching, he references the angelic doctor. Right now, who is the angelic doctor? Someone in this crowd has got to know. You can't be wearing a habit to answer the question. All right, someone in this crowd, someone said it. All right, St. Thomas Aquinas. All right, very good. All right, St. Thomas Aquinas is the angelic doctor. Now, a little note on translation here. What I read to you, all right, here, what you see here, is the Vatican English translation, all right, and it refers to the virtue of munificence. All right, the Latin text is a little bit different. It refers to virtutis magnificentia, all right, or the virtue of what? Magnificence, all right? So what is referred to here as munificence is also known, I would say more commonly, as magnificence. And that's the term I'm a little more familiar with and the one that I'll use. But in any event, regardless of the English word you wish to use, the point is this. Drawing from the work of St. Thomas Aquinas, Pius XI teaches that virtue is exemplified by the deployment and management of resources in order to support the expansion of gainful employment opportunities and the production of useful products and services that benefit society. All right, now the modern business professional has the particular opportunity to participate in this task. So let's examine a little about what this virtue means. And let's take a look at what the angelic doctor says, because his reflections on magnificence and commerce is going to lead us to the important and I think essential point about the role of profit. All right, now when you think of the word magnificence, what comes to mind? Now for Aquinas, magnificence is a virtue that he allies or associates with fortitude or courage, all right? One of the four cardinal moral virtues. Right now, magnificence is not the same as fortitude, right? But it shares something of its character. It shares something of courageous character. Right, so what's the difference? Right now, while fortitude pertains to the ability to sustain challenges and otherwise conquer fear of bodily injury and death when the circumstances demand it, right? Magnificence allows us to surmount difficulties like the anxiety, unreasonable caution, or cowardliness associated with the management of material resources entrusted to our care. All right? In other words, magnificence speaks to the quality of boldness that is necessary to pursue significant investment opportunities and make prudent business decisions. Right? That's the way to understand the virtue of magnificence in this context. And what is St. Thomas's most famous work? All right, the Summa Theologia. All right, Aquinas offers two examples of types of magnificent acts. The first is an application of funds for the purpose of showing reverence to another person deserving of honor. All right, the purpose of showing reverence to another person deserving of honor. All right, this can include something like the construction of civic monuments, a memorial to the soldiers of World War II, for example. All right, but it's the second example that he offers that interests us. Now, the second example consists of an expenditure directed toward bringing into effect something for the good of the state or community. An expenditure directed toward bringing into effect something for the good of the state or community. Pius XI probably had this second type of act in mind when incorporating the point about magnificence and commerce into his encyclical. However, it is worth pointing out that Aquinas himself does not specifically list commercial affairs among his examples of magnificence. He himself doesn't directly make that connection between virtue and business pursuits. And there is a reason for that. That reason stems from the role that profit or gain can too easily assume in motivating business pursuits. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, profit or pecuniary gain as a motive for any activity carries the risk, probably a reasonably high risk, of causing the development of an inordinate love of money. And an inordinate attachment to money is always a vice, avarice. And a vice cannot be made into a virtue, regardless of the number of job opportunities or greatness of the product produced. All right? It's important to be clear about that, because in many contexts, in many economic schools, we're told the opposite, all right? But a vice cannot be made into a virtue. And the pursuit of profit was something that generally troubled, especially many of the early scholastic thinkers like Aquinas. Aquinas views profit-seeking as the kind of activity that provides far too of a fertile ground for an impulse towards sin. An unchecked profit-seeking behavior invites the insatiable appetite for more and more, even if you enter into the business world for innocent reasons. The deck, in homage to Albert Carr's comparison to business as a card game, the deck in favor of greed is, even if in subtle forms, stacked against you. Right now, the modern social encyclicals incorporate and preserve much of that same concern that the early scholastics would have had about profit. Repeatedly, throughout the encyclicals, the reader will find criticism of unrestrained profit maximization in business pursuits. Right? John Paul II includes what he calls the all-consuming desire for profit among the attitudes opposed to the will of God. Right? His immediate predecessor, Benedict XVI, particularly criticized business management practices that aim only at expanding the profits of owners while ignoring the interests of other stakeholders who contribute to the enterprise, such as workers, clients, suppliers, and the communities in which the business operates. Now, it is crucial to point out that the authors of the encyclicals have not been naive. They have not been naive concerning the critical and absolutely necessary role of profit in commercial enterprise. All right, what I mean by that is it's easy to think of criticism toward the pursuit of profit as just being simply naive, and one of the factors that would suggest the church ought to stay out of business fairs altogether, because after all, that is the point, right? The point of any successful business is to make money. Otherwise, why? All right, it will fail. Otherwise, what? It will fail. It won't exist. There would be no business. All right? The church is not ignorant of that fact. All right? John Paul II stated unequivocally that the church acknowledges the legitimate role of profit as an indication that a business is functioning well. And Pius XI went perhaps even further by teaching that any attempt to abolish pecuniary gain in the commercial context is morally wrong. All right? Pius XI says that any attempt to abolish pecuniary gain in the commercial context is morally wrong. All right? That's a pretty strong remark. And it's also worth noting that the popes have not failed to recognize the claims of business professionals to receive remuneration commensurate with their efforts. All right, what do I mean by that? Well, Pius XI wrote the following: "It is only fair that he who renders service to the community and makes it richer should also, through the increase of wealth of the community, be made richer himself, according to his position, provided that all these things be sought with due respect for the laws of God, and without impairing the rights of others, and that they be employed in accordance with faith and right reason." Okay, so how do we reconcile the tension that is present in all of this? All right, Pius XI says that private commercial investment can be an opportunity to exercise virtue, and he cites one of the highest thinkers in the church's intellectual patrimony in his support. And yet that very same thinker, Aquinas, as well as the popes themselves in their social readings, have had a high level of moral concern for the profit motive that accompanies private business affairs. So how do we reconcile the tension? Right, the answer I think is this: the pursuit of profit should never be the main aim of any commercial endeavor. Instead, profit should be used as an instrument to serve a higher objective, rather than instrumentalize the persons involved in business. Business should seek to instrumentalize profit and place it at the service of higher goals. All right, so let's explain that a little. What I'm suggesting to you is that what surfaces from the reading of the modern social encyclicals is the vision of a commercial environment where personal gain is not the sole or even primary motive for business activity, but neither is it ignored. All right, John Paul II, I know I've been referencing him a lot, all right, but John Paul II explains this point well in his 1991 encyclical Centesimus Annus. He writes the following: "The purpose of a business firm is not simply to make a profit, but is to be found in its very existence as a community of persons who in various ways are endeavoring to satisfy their basic needs and who form a particular group at the service of the whole of society. Profit is a regulator of the life of a business, but it is not the only one. Other human and moral factors must also be considered, which in the long run are at least equally important for the life of a business." Now, some of Aquinas' reflections on pecuniary gain in the commercial setting can help shed light on the ideas present in these papal documents. Aquinas argues that while commerce for the sake of profit has by its very nature a certain debasement attached to it, right? Aquinas was very suspicious of the seeking of profit, right? On account of its propensity to incline the person toward greed. Profit-seeking behavior is of itself not essentially sinful or contrary to virtue. Right? That was a matter that was very much in question in the early medieval period. You might remember when I began this evening, I talked about the irony of medieval friars, all right, being the group of people who created or legitimized a way for the early commercial medieval merchants to conduct their activities within the moral sphere of the church. All right, and Aquinas contributed that, all right, by determining that profit-seeking behavior is of itself not essentially sinful or contrary to virtue. Where profit otherwise earned fairly is directed toward a necessary or virtuous end, all right, Aquinas thought that activity can itself become licit and even honorable. All right, now Aquinas offers some examples. He offers some examples of instances where profit-seeking behavior is oriented toward a further good. All right, for Aquinas, acceptable ends for profit-seeking behavior would include the pursuit of a modest gain for the purpose of maintaining one's household in a manner appropriate, all right, to that person's state in life. All right, or profit in order to obtain some benefit from which to provide assistance to the needy. All right, but thirdly, Aquinas thought profit derived from an activity ordered to produce some advantage for the public, right? Where, for instance, a particular business enterprise provides the community with better access to certain necessities is also acceptable on Aquinas' account. All right, now in this latter case, commercial activity furthers the common good, and the receipt of a fair amount of profit is warranted in order to compensate those engaged in the enterprise for their efforts. Right? Johannes Neider, all right, the author of what the LA Times calls the first written business tract in the Western world, all right, the Dominican Johannes Neider, in the 15th century. Right? He noted that many of the products and services provided through private business, even in his day, would otherwise need to be provided by the state, if not provided by these businesses, so that the private enterprise is benefiting the public by its initiative and is therefore proven itself a responsible steward and worthy of reward. All right, that's Johannes Neider in 1468. All right, but these three things, seeking profit for the sake of maintaining one's household, one's family, consistent with the person's state in life, all right, that's one. Two, in order to provide assistance to the needy. And three, to produce some advantage for the public, all right? This is Aquinas' list. It's not exclusive, right? And the popes don't limit the higher ends of commercial activity of these three. But what's important here is that the modern social encyclicals tell us that the person who exemplifies virtue in the commercial context is the one who, while recognizing the necessity of profit for the life of the business, pursues that profit for the purpose of achieving some other higher goal. In other words, he or she makes profit a tool for doing good. Right? Now we can consider these three examples from Aquinas as instances of doing this. All right? And I'm going to mention now just a few examples here of some modern expansions on this idea. All right, but before I do that, it's important to mention that the papal writings do not envision something like a negotiation or a kind of trade-off with avarice, where if I share a portion of my profits, I'm free to be covetous with what remains. Right? This is not a kind of spiritual tax paid for the license to pursue pecuniary gain. And there is much more to this. There is much more to this than doing well by doing good. All right? As if I just give a little cut to some charity, I'm free to pursue as much as I want. All right? That's not it. What's essential here is the motive for why you do what you do. All right? The intentions of your efforts should be to do good. Good that results shouldn't be some collateral effect. All right? Are you in your business and do you pursue your work principally for a reason other than personal gain? All right? Is the material gain derived used instrumentally as a tool to achieve those higher ends? All right? Those are the questions. All right, now the problem is that those skills that we talked about earlier, those things that business provides the opportunity to cultivate, cease to be virtues if their motivation is self-gain. Right? This is one reason why the social character or purpose of one's business matters. In his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis explains that business is a vocation, and a noble vocation, provided that those engaged in it see themselves challenged by a greater meaning in life. Right? And the way to live the nobility of that vocation is to link the generation of material resources, right, the business activity, to non-pecuniary goals. Right? The way to live the nobility of the vocation is to link the generation of material resources to non-pecuniary goals. All right, now I'm running out of time, but I want to make just a few brief comments, all right, about modern examples. Right? And I can't go into this as much as I would like. But in the last several years, especially following on the heels of the financial crisis that began in 07-08, the notion that businesses should have a social purpose is an idea that has gained traction. Legislative changes throughout the United States have followed upon the growing interest in an expanding notion of what you hear as corporate social responsibility. 33 states in the District of Columbia. Ohio is not one of the 33. Ohio is not among them. 33 states in the District of Columbia have adopted benefit corporation laws that allow for the creation of corporations that, while designed to seek profit, are devoted toward pursuing an identified social benefit. All right? Now, benefit corporations are not nonprofits. They're not nonprofits. They are taxed as any other private corporation. However, unlike general for-profit organizations, benefit corporations incorporate into their charter a business mission to pursue a public or social purpose. That public or social purpose can be general or specific and need not satisfy the more stringent legal standards that define charitable entities. Right? The central characteristic of a benefit corporation is that, while organized on a for-profit basis, its purpose explicitly includes non-financial goals that are more than a means toward a financial end. And consistent with the broader purpose of the legislation, the statute expands the legally defined fiduciary duties of a benefit corporation's managers and directors to require, rather than to simply allow, the consideration of interests other than shareholder profit. All right? You may use some of the products of some of these benefit corporations. All right? Some of the popular ones include the apparel maker Patagonia, all right, or the organic baby food maker Plum Organics. Now, this initiative, benefit corporation laws, and those like it, such as social responsibility certifications, reflect earlier but lesser known Catholic commercial movements, such as the Economy of Communion, a global business network inspired by the lay organization Focolare. Right? Members of the Economy of Communion, right, the EEOC, are private, separately owned for-profit entities united by a common spirituality inspired by this woman, Chiara Lubick, an Italian laywoman whose cause for canonization opened in 2015. Right now, consistent with Lubick's own work, Economy of Communion entities place a special emphasis on business as a meeting place for people where commerce offers the potential for cooperative personal development. All right, what does this mean? What makes EOC entities, Economy of Communion entities, different from other companies? All right, now, while the particular manifestation of their practices vary, one universal characteristic of EOC entities is a shared commitment to have a threefold division of firm profits. Each Economy of Communion entity agrees to devote one part of the firm's profits to investment in the firm's future growth, another portion to the support of the infrastructure designed to spread the EOC movement, and third, to assisting the poor. Right, now that portion that the firm dedicates to the poor is directed either to specific recipients in the community that the entity conducts its business, or to the movement's international organization founded to support projects in the developing world. Right, the key here for the economy of communion is that the profit-sharing arrangement aims at more than mere philanthropy. All right, aims at more than mere philanthropy. All right, economy of communion entities unite their business success with an active apostolate to those in need. All right, so the connection here is deeper than charity a la carte. The arrangement changes the character of the relationship between the business and those who share in its success, rather than being simply a recipient of surplus funds or the beneficiary of an end-of-the-year giving campaign. The EOC brings into its business a kind of silent partner who participates in the success of its commercial performance. And in this way, the charitable service is no mere add-on to the business itself. Instead, the apostolate is incorporated into the business plan itself. All right? The charitable contributions they make are no mere end-of-the-year add-on. Instead, their support of the apostolate is incorporated into the business plan itself. Right, now, why do I highlight these initiatives? Right? Well, I think that they are both examples of the kind of entities that facilitate hybrid forms of commercial behavior. That was his term, quote, hybrid forms of commercial behavior, that Pope Benedict encourages in his Caritas in Veritate. All right? This way of doing business holds, according to Benedict, particular promise for civilizing the economy. Now, of course, one need not work through a benefit corporation or an economy of communion entity in order to subordinate the generation of profit to a higher aim. Other, less prescribed methods may be preferable for a variety of reasons, especially for early-stage entities and other new business ventures. But yet, even where not well suited, the example set by these new initiatives is instructive. An environment populated by businesses that incorporate concerns beyond their own commercial success can be expected to generate a healthier moral climate, and wider adoption of the pattern set by these institutions can usher in a society where progress in business is ultimately measured in terms other than dollars alone, not without dollars, but in ways other than dollars alone. All right, so let me conclude by saying this. Reorientating commercial activity to support the human community is a matter about which the Church has been unmistakably clear. And while placing profit in a proper perspective is not the entirety of Catholic business ethics, it is, I think, the bedrock principle that serves as a personal guide. All right, thank you.
All right. Everyone, get your hardest questions ready. We want some real hardball questions here tonight. It'll make things more interesting for me, at least. Watch them sweat a little bit. But who wants to ask the first question? And I'm going to bring the mic so that the people on the website can hear you.
Thank you for the talk,
Yep.
Father. I just noticed during Quadrasimo Anno, number 51, when you had it up there, you were talking about the virtue of magnificence.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed on there it mentioned the virtue of munificence.
Mm-hmm. Is
that what you meant, or?
No, I mean this is a kind of translation issue. All right, so the official document is going to be found in its Latin. All right, the part I quoted to you, the portion that I quoted here, all right, uses a Latin term that would, I think, more faithfully be translated into magnificence. All right, and it renders it munificence. Right. The reason why I stuck with magnificence is because Pius XI is referencing St. Thomas. Right, and when St. Thomas uses that term and describes it as a virtue, right, the term he uses would probably more faithfully be translated as magnificence. Right, so it's a translation issue, for lack of a better word, but one that I think is of pretty minor import. All right, so I stuck to the rendering of that word that I'm more familiar with from generally accepted English translations of Aquinas' work, because Pius XI is citing Aquinas when he makes that comment.
Any other questions? This is going to be really short. There we go.
right.
The man in white.
I'd honestly never heard I'd heard of Chiara Lubeck. I had not heard of, were they economies of communion or?
Economy of Communion,
Economy
and
of Communion.
Focolare is her general movement of spirituality. All right, in 1991, when she was visiting Brazil in Sao Paulo, she saw this need for a kind of business expression, all right, of her religious movement, and that was what gave birth to the Economy of Communion. Now, the Economy of Communion, there are Economy of Communion businesses in the United States. There are certainly Focolare chapters. There are Economy of Communion chapters. There are people doing work in this field in the U.S. Right, but most Economy of Communion entities are going to be found in Italy and South America. All right, that's where it's been a little bit more popular. All right, but it does have a presence here in the United States, and I think that if her cause for canonization takes root and expands, all right, initiatives like these should expect to receive greater attention. All right.
What are some like particular examples of them, the economies of communion?
Of the companies themselves? Well, the companies themselves are going to be small companies. All right. These are not. You're not going to find, for example, I referenced a few larger and probably household name companies as benefit corporations. Right, there are more of those. Kickstarter is another example of a benefit corporation. Right, but the Economy of Communion entities that I know we're talking about companies that employ 50 to 100 employees, all right, for some, and others that are actually even quite smaller, all right, from 5 to 10. But they're going to be smaller entities that aren't household names. The closest one I can think of around here is there's a company in Indiana that I know of, a fairly sizable engineering firm that is an Economy of Communion company, headquartered somewhere near Indianapolis. He skipped you.
Can you think of a way to start teaching ethics to first graders?
Well, I think the real place to start with ethics, all right, is not situational ethics, all right. So to answer that question, with first graders, it's very hard, all right. When I think about it to older populations, all right, adults or young adults, I like to keep in mind the fact that our time in this world is very limited, all right, and there is going to be a small subset of things that are going to truly matter in your last hours, and those are the ones that will be important. And everything else, all right, while not unimportant, it has to be placed relative to those items that are still going to be significant to you as you take your last breath. Right now, that's not going to work for first graders, all right? Or at least if it does, all right, I've got a sort of special group, and they're probably going to give me a kind of a blank stare, all right? But ethics generally, I think, needs to be taught maybe this way, all right? Maybe this way. One thing that I think is always unsuccessful in ethics is teaching it as something like a rules-based system. A rules-based system. A rule. In other words, that there's a set of rules, and whether you like them or not doesn't matter. You must follow them, and you must follow them. All right, I think that's unsuccessful. I think a better way maybe to reach a younger crowd is to say something like this. Probably start out with a question. Have you ever been wrong about something that you thought was good for you? All right, and the way I would pose it is, have you ever eaten too much candy? Right? Now, not everybody's going to say yes. I'm taking a risk with this question. All right, but you're going to have a few kids, especially if I say to them, have at Halloween, have your parents ever said to you, all right, no more than 1 or 2 pieces, no more than 1 or 2, that's it.
No more what?
No more than 1 or 2 pieces, that's it. All right, and you maybe sneak a 3rd piece, and you think that's good. And then you have 4 and 5 and 6, and then what happens? All right, well, you are sick. All right, so the point is, we as human beings are capable of being wrong about what's good for us. All right, and that's what I would want to tell them. Have you ever been in a position where you thought that looks like a good idea, turned out to be a bad idea? All right, if there's a first grader who's particularly enterprising and is already riding his bicycle without training wheels, he's riding along, he's watching videos of motorcycles flying off these jumps and these, that's great. Most classes have a kid like that, all right? That's the daredevil. All right, the daredevil's out there on his bike, he sees this hill, he's like, I'm going to jump up and just be like that guy I saw on whatever the video, and he's riding, speeds up, jumps over it, well, falls and hurts himself, right? Has to run home, Dad, Mom, I'm hurt. All right, well, jumping that hill looked like a good idea, right? Turned out to be a very bad idea. All right, so I would look until I found the right example that would fit for that crowd, and then I would say, that problem right there is only going to get more complicated as you get older. All right, and that's the sake of ethics, not to give you rules to follow, all right, but to keep you from harming yourself. All right, that's the real purpose of ethics, to keep you from harming yourself.
Or this or that question, and then when they compare this and that, then you can point out which one's ethical.
Yeah, I mean, hard to tell what you might get from a crowd like that. It's hard to say, but sure, yes, that would work. Okay, thank you.
If you don't know anything about this, it's fine, but I've heard people talking about Catholic charities, and that there's some charities out there that aren't necessarily in it for, well, they appear and they say that they're in it for the good, but they're making quite a bit of money, and that we need to be careful which ones are truly doing the most with the money that they have. So how do we, if they say they're Catholic charities, how do we know, are they ever sanctioned by the church? How do you deal with this when they're going under the guise?
Well, I mean, some, of course, operate as kind of instrumentalities or efforts of a collection of bishops, all right, the USCCB, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, or a diocesan entity, all right, but some are entirely separate from either one of those, and at least is faithful to the church. All right, I don't know that there's any substitute for some level, not exhaustive, but some level of investigation of your own to get comfortable with their efforts. One of the benefits, there are many disadvantages, all right, but one of the benefits of something like these search engines is that it's harder to hide, all right, it's harder to hide if you're really using this money for reasons that you would not want them to go toward, all right, or if they're being less than forthcoming with what they're doing in terms of meeting their charitable ends. All right, so I don't think there's any real substitute for some level of personal investigation, but it is the case that any entity that has been around for a long time, right? The church itself needs to be refreshed from time to time, so that when you find a situation like that, and you otherwise were going to give this institution a contribution, tell them why you're not. All right, that's something important that it needs to hear.
But you don't know of any like real go-to site where they've done investigations on these different groups.
I don't know any offhand. All right, but that's not the same to say that it doesn't exist. All right. We'll talk about first graders again.
I was married to a fellow one time, and we moved from the East Coast essentially to Seattle.
Okay.
And suddenly he was getting very generous with me because I was missing my kids and my pets. So I found this bird that I wanted, an African gray, and they're very expensive. So it became a household thing to, hurry up to a pet store so he could see that African gray and want it just as much as I did. So this one pet store we went into, the owner of the shop said, I sold him this afternoon, but he said, I have 3 Lutino cockatiels that you would just love, and one of them just lays eggs one after the other. And suddenly, my husband says, we'll take him. And I thought, what is the matter with him? I mean, he never cared about birds or whatever. And then he orders a breeding box, and he orders cages and all sorts of good things for them to play with. And it took me about 4 or 5 years and 12 exotic birds that I realized that he made a business out of it come income tax time.
Huh. Wow. Okay. Well, I hope it was a promising one. I hope it was a lucrative one for you. All right.
Any brave birdie with the last question?
Over here.
And we could take more if you have more.
My concern is on the last part of your talk when you indicated about companies focusing on social concerns, and with today's climate where there's no right or wrong, maybe in a bad example, but Bill Gates and third world contraception, and I'd rather see a company be more geared toward profit in those situations than go down the wrong path on a social concern issue.
Yeah, certainly that's a concern. I look at it a little bit differently, and I think the way I look at it is this. If entities are moving beyond seeing profit as their sole focus and willing to consider the impact that their business has on the wider world, right, that at least gives, I think, Catholics and all folks of goodwill to enter into conversation with them about whether their other purpose is really socially beneficial. All right, and without opening that space, there's no room for us to really dialogue in that affairs. So I don't discount the risk. I think that's a serious one. I think you're right to point it out. All right, but I'm a little bit more optimistic. Not to say that I think we necessarily win and succeed in persuading everyone that what they believe to be socially beneficial is not, but at least open space where we can talk about it. And I think that can be helpful. All right, that's the way I would look at it.
With regard to that benefit corporations, I did a quick little research. I hadn't heard about them, so I did
Yeah.
a quick little bit of research. But just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, like I'm trying to figure out what the incentive is, because a company and their leadership can already set aside funds for specific charities or whatever they want to go down there. I mean, in order for a government entity, for a state to create the legislation to create benefit corporations, there's got to be some kind of an incentive to attract businesses or thinkers, entrepreneurs, to want to pursue that particular type of business.
Yeah.
What would that be? Let's see. I mean, you said they're regular companies, so it's not
Yeah.
a tax incentive. So I'm trying to figure out what that incentive is.
A couple reasons. Some are cultural, some are specifically legal. The legal one is this. All right, remember that this legislation requires the management and the board to take into account the specified social benefit in the entity's charter. All right, so a charter is going to say, Patagonia, for example, has committed itself to, I believe it's 1% of its revenue goes toward scientific efforts to curb global warming. All right, I'm not sure that that's the exact words, but that's an example. All right, Patagonia has committed itself to do that. Its board can't revisit each year whether or not we're going to do that. It's locked into doing that. And more importantly, because it's a benefit corporation, its boards, in following that mandate, are shielded from any fiduciary duty complaints. All right, so specifically in the state of Delaware, right, directors who pursue interests that can't fairly closely be linked to the profit interests of the firm have exposed themselves to a level of to some level of legal exposure from their shareholders. All right, what benefit corporations were designed to do were chiefly to protect shareholders from just that. All right, now that's the legal answer. All right, and it's also worth pointing out that you referred to the fact that for the most part businesses already have this flexibility. They can do this now. Right? This mandates them to do whatever this is. Right? In a benefit corporation, these other, what I call silent partners, all right, that's mandated, so they have to do it. It's not something that the board visits at the end of the year and makes a decision that this particular contribution to the United Way would be strategically important because we get listed as a silver donor and the gala attracts people who are possible customers, that kind of thing. All right, so it takes on a different character. All right, but culturally what it does, I think, is in the minds of its employees and workers, changes the purpose for why they're a part of this thing to begin with. All right, so everyone who's involved in that business, most directly its employees, all right, but also those who do business with it, all right, understand what these goals are, or at least have access to the information to know what these goals are, all right, and can then create the environment for a different reason, aside from, but not exclusive of, aside from earning a living for coming to work. All right, that's the cultural benefit that I think it provides. All right, that's why I think it's an area that I would like to see the Catholic world explore more. All right. Yes.
This may seem kind of naive because I am pretty naive with business issues, but if 501c3s and nonprofit statuses are being threatened by political groups who want to narrow the direction and the use of those kinds of monies to less appropriate goals, wouldn't these communions be ultimately or potentially be threatened to have narrower and narrower uses of the things they can use legally as a way to send their money or a faith-based concept? All right,
now this is a good question. I'm glad you raised it. All right, why? Certainly there is some evidence or reason to believe that at least in the last administration, certain 501c3 entities received a heightened degree of scrutiny, one not seen historically. All right, but why were those entities receiving that scrutiny? All right, because it was seeking designation of a nonprofit status, all right, for their operations to be deemed nonprofit. Right, that triggers a level of review. Right, now remember that for a benefit corporation, it's not reviewed. Right, a benefit corporation, as far as taxation is concerned, is treated like any private enterprise. right? There isn't a level of review by the IRS, right? The way the Department of Treasury can at least theoretically call into question most 501c3 entities, not really churches, but other ones. That same possibility does not exist for social benefit corporations. He has a follow-up.
I think an equally ominous threat would be the social media attacks on companies that would use fundings to do things that we think are beneficial. I mean, you see companies all the time now who are literally threatened with, boycotts and attacks of certain. I mean, these things that I think are always going to be on the grow.
I think that there is some room for creativity in how you describe what your social benefit is. But the potential for that exists regardless, all right? So Chick-fil-A faced some of this, all right? Not a benefit corporation, all right? So I think the harm that you reference is a real one, all right? But I don't think being a benefit corporation or not is going to change that all that much. Okay?
Well, thank you everyone for attending, and I hope to see all of you for next month's Into the Deep. It's going to be Father Gabriel Toretta talking about beauty and theological aesthetics. So a real change of gears from business to beauty. But I hope to see you all there. God bless.